technique is a very, the Alexander technique is a very broad system. So I often start in a different place according to who I'm talking to. And I was thinking of, you know, how to talk to viol players and how to talk to musicians. And I decided to say, first off, that learning the Alexander technique is a little bit like the training of a musical ear. And we're all familiar with, you know, oral exercises where we sit down and we listen to a slow movement of a Haydn string quartet and somebody says, okay, write down the viola part. And of course we all panic at that. But of course it is possible with practice to train one's ear to be able to hear musical information that is quite unavailable to an untrained person. And I think the Alexander technique is a little bit like that, except that instead of training our ears, we're training our body awareness. So I said in the write-up for this, the invitation to this, that we'd be doing experiments to do with kind of exploring your body awareness. So that's what we're up to. It's maybe, if any of you have tuned harpsichords and you think back to when you started tuning harpsichords and you had to try to learn to hear beats, it's that sort of level of detail. So the problem that I'm faced with, of course, is trying to find meaningful exercises to try to help you almost push the envelope of what you can sense. That means it's not going to have 100% success rate, but I hope that with quite a big group, which we've got, we're going to get some meaningful results out of that. And even if some people are saying, I can't hear the beats, there'll be other people who say, oh, actually I can. So that's, I hope I'm going to pitch it at the right level. We'll find out. Human movement is very, very complicated, of course, partly because we have fairly complex structure, what with our upright posture and our opposable thumbs and so on. And also, of course, that we have such a wide range of potential activities that we get up to that can get very, very complex, like playing viols. So I'm going to try to start by really simplifying that and stripping that back to the really bare essentials. And I'm going to give you a sort of mission statement sentence for what we're up to tonight. And that is to say, I'm going to give you a screen share. That is to say that in all vertebrate creatures, I'm just going to try and get this full, there we go, screen. In all vertebrate creatures, the head leads a sinuous, elastic extension of the spine as a basis for all movement. So that's kind of where we're going. Let me show you what that looks like in motion. So in all vertebrate creatures, the head leads a sinuous, elastic extension of the spine as a basis for all movement. And that's really exactly what's going on there. I hope that's kind of visible. So in Alexander, we're very concerned with what you might call the snake skeleton, which is the skeletal structure that we share with a very, very simple vertebrate animal, such as a snake or a fish. So we sometimes talk about the interrelationship between the head and the neck and the back as a starting point for saying, well, how am I coordinating myself? How am I going to kind of listen into my my body awareness? Where do I have to start? And where we have to start in the Alexander technique is with this head, neck, back interrelationship. And this idea that of the head leading a sinuous, elastic extension of the spine. So we're going to launch into an experiment. I'm going to show you another photo. I told you, I said this was going to happen, that I can't change the slides when I'm on full screen. So sorry, I'm just going to have to sort that out. Okay, we're going to have smaller pictures. This, for those of you who have experience with small children, which is going to be quite a lot of you, I think, this is a very, very characteristic movement or position for children of this sort of age. And I thought we'd actually try this out. But because it's so hard to see ourselves, what we're going to do is we're going to split into two groups. And we've got so many Michaels and Marys that I think I'm going to go with surnames. So group one is surnames A to M, and group two is surnames N to Z. And what I'd like you to do, this is something I picked up playing recorder consorts, of listening to one other person, but you don't actually tell them who they are. So let's say group one are the observers, group two are the people who are actually going to do it. So remembering that picture of the little boy just now, if the group two people would like to back up so that we can see a bit more of you. And group one people are going to just watch them. So if group two people can kind of get themselves side on and standing and get their cameras so that we can kind of see them. That's great. We've got a few people going for that. So we need to be able to see your upper body. Have I misjudged the people who are in group one and group two? Would a couple more people like to be in group two, because Celia's kind of all on her own at the moment. That's great. Yeah, Michael and or Edith. We just need a few people to watch. And if you're standing and side on, Celia's doing great. And we'd like to just watch you pick up something from the ground in the manner of the picture of the little boy. Okay, that's great. And we'll sort of see. Ibby, can we see your head? That's great. That's great. Okay, go for it.
Pick up something from the floor.
And then you're picking up something from the floor, just like the slide of the little boy we saw. Okay, that's great. Willie or Vila, can we see you side on maybe a little bit more? So kind of sideways. Yeah, that's great. Go for it from there. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Okay, and I'm sort of seeing what I'm seeing. Let's swap over. Let's swap groups. So some of the people who've been watching can make the movement. Some of the people who've been making the movement can watch. And you're watching kind of, if you can see me, you're watching kind of around this area. So sort of base of the skull. So let's have a look. That's great. Okay. I mean, this is easier to do when you're all in the same room, but let's all come back together. That's all great, and I've seen what I need to see. And what I'm seeing, can I pin myself? Does that make me big for everybody? I think it does. What one sees, if you do this with a group, and not everybody's going to do exactly the same thing, but the most kind of normal thing, most common result is that as people begin that bend, you'll see the back of their head, you'll see kind of this back of the neck kind of retract into the collar. And obviously I'm not going to pick on individuals, but that was a very visible kind of general pattern, and that's normal in the sense of that's what people normally do. And it's you're in very good company, because it's one of the very first things that Alexander noticed in himself. But what it does indicate is that we're tending to move by shortening ourselves. So rather than moving like a grass snake, where you get this head leading the extension of the spine, there's a tendency in us to move in such a way that we're actually pulling the head in to ourselves as we move, and that kind of compresses the spine as we move. It's as if we had a toy train, and the numbered trucks are vertebrae, and the locomotive is our skull, and it's as if the locomotive suddenly gets stopped, or it puts its brakes on. And of course, what happens then is that the first truck collides with the back of the locomotive, the second truck collides with the first truck, and so on. And you get a kind of compression wave that goes right back through the whole spine. And it's normal, as in it's the most common way that you see people moving, that when we move to pick up something from the floor, when we move between sitting and standing, when we run, when we do all sorts of things, the more effort we make, the more we tend to pull ourselves into ourselves. So that's actually the reverse of what we'd like to have happening. I thought we'd just find the, come out of the screen share. Again, there we are. I thought we'd just find in ourselves this topmost joint. This is like the coupling between the locomotive and the first truck. So if you, so that's the joint between the topmost vertebra and the skull. So if you feel behind your ears, you'll find two little bumps of bone behind your ears. And just in front of that, there's a soft bit before you get to the back of the jaw. And then if you imagine an axis through there, that gives you that little nodding joint. That's right at the top. It's very high. You can see on me, it's kind of tip of nose level. And that's higher than most people map that or understand that or think where they think it is not that high. So that idea of accurate mapping can be very helpful as well. So having discovered a little bit of the problem that we tend to shorten ourselves when we move, or we may tend to shorten ourselves when we move, and it tends to be that the higher stress situations, or the more worried we are about it, or the more we're trying harder, or the more semiquavers there are, the worse that gets. And the more we tend to discoordinate ourselves as we make more effort. And of course, that's counterproductive. So we need a way of beginning to get into touch with our head, neck, back interrelationship. And one of the absolute mainstays of how we do that in the Alexander technique is a lying down exercise called semi-supine. Sometimes it's called constructive rest. They're the same thing if you've come across one or other. You'll need, and we're going to spend 5 minutes in semi-supine now, just to experiment with that. I'll show it to you. You need just somewhere to lie down on the floor. I've got a yoga mat over there. And you need a little head support. So either some paperback books, or these are kind of mini yoga blocks. So I hope you've got a spot where you can set yourself up on the floor, and you've got a couple of paperback books that you can use as a head support. And I'll go over here and I'll show you what it looks like. So you're lying simply on your back. You need, even if you're comfortable with nothing under your head, you want a bit of support under your head just to kind of take up that stretch through the back of the neck, and to move away from any tendency to kind of shorten into the back of the neck and pull the head in. The feet are standing, the knees are pointing at the ceiling, and the palms of your hands can just rest on your tummy or on your lower ribs. And then you just start to ask for any tension that you didn't know about that was there. So as you begin to sort of quieten down in yourself, as you've got less to do, as you're just resting there, you'll begin to sense where you're holding on to things. So maybe you could let your back just settle generally a little bit more. And as it does so, you'll tend to lengthen out. You'll find gradually that as you settle down there, your breathing will slow as you get a bit more space for it. So it'll tend to get bigger and slower as you untangle. Maybe you'll find one shoulder blade is a little bit lifted compared to the other, in which case you can see what you can do to just kind of settle it down. And one can spend 15 or 20 minutes in that position, gradually just untangling. We don't have the time to spend more than just a few minutes there now. We're going to add something onto that, which is a movement. So imagine that your spine lying along the floor, lying along your yoga mat, is like a piece of anchor chain. So it's quite a heavy linked chain. And of course, each link represents a vertebra. And starting at your tail, and to start with, this will be an absolutely imperceptible movement to somebody watching you. It's not going to be visible, but you'll feel it going on internally. You're going to just lift towards the ceiling the first link. So that's just a tiny little roll of your pelvis to lift the tip of your tail up towards the ceiling. And to just see if you can find that movement. So some of these movements, if one isn't used to doing this kind of thing, takes a little bit of time just to say, okay, can I find that movement? Or is it unfamiliar and therefore just a little bit tricky to find? And then once you've got that, and you can do it a few times just to find it, see if you can lift the first link and the second link. So it's as if there's somebody just lifting the tip of your tail straight up towards the ceiling. And when you've lifted the first link of the chain and the second link of the chain, you can put the second link back down, and then the first link back down. And then the next time you can lift the first link and the second link and the third link. And then you put the third one back down and the second one back down and the first one back down. And then I'll just leave you for a couple of minutes to just work through lifting gradually one more link each time until you come up into what looks like a bridge. So you'll be supported between your shoulders and your feet eventually. But we're not doing it at all as a strengthening exercise. So it's actually most productive if one stays as relaxed as possible, if one catches any unnecessary effort and says to oneself, okay, that's probably not necessary, I don't need to do that. But nevertheless, you're making the movement And just as I'm talking generally, you can be going on and just working up through the length of the chain, through the length of the spine, and back down again, and back up again, until you've come all the way up into a bridge and all the way back down again. So the point really is to become more conversant with the articulation of your spine. So like the video of the grass snake, rather than getting trapped into thinking that there might be a particular good shape for the spine, what we're really after is awareness of every little bit of articulation through the spine. And this is a very approachable way to doing that. So when you've worked through that, and I think you've probably had long enough to work your way through, you could come back to your camera and we'll go on to the next one. Okay, so something obviously that we as humans do is we have this rather unique way of balancing ourselves upright. So our spines turn from horizontal structures like you see in a dog into a vertical tower, and that's always the question of how we deal with that. So the next one we're going to do, you'll need a chair. And you can just follow me along with this one. So I'm sitting, whatever my neutral is, but with thought of not pulling my head down into myself, of allowing that articulation and clarity of the spine that I hope you've got from doing the spine like a chain lying down exercise. It seems to make one's back feel a little more awake, which is a good thing. So building on that, we're just going to make a little forward lean and come back to vertical. And you can think of, because we want the head leading that sinuous, elastic extension of the spine, it's useful to think of the crown of my head is kind of tracking across the ceiling, rather than my face going down there. So I've got this sense of the crown of my head is going up, and as I make that movement, I've got a ripple going on, because the spinal curves need to change as the angles change there. So in simply making that movement, you've got a rather useful and rather lovely ripple going on through the spine. It's so small you can't see it. It's so subtle you can't do it. But with that awareness of the length and the articulation of the spine, it's going to happen. And that, again, is going to wake up that snake skeleton. There's an image I rather like for this. We'll do this one again in a minute. Just when I've shown you this, it'll give you just another way of thinking about it. There's a picture of your sitting bones, just in case you're not sure about those, but I'm guessing people will be familiar with their sitting bones, the blue ones, as what they're balancing on when they're making that movement. But the one I wanted to show you was this. We've all made these tin can telephones, and I had this idea that if your skull was one tin can and your pelvis was the other tin can, and there's a stretch through the connecting structure, which would be a string if it were a tin can telephone, but of course is a spine in ourselves, then what you get is communication between one end of the spine and the other. So I think maybe we'll just go back to that movement one more time, just with those couple of extra ideas. So I know I'm on my sitting bones. If you're not quite sure where your sitting bones are, you can sit on your hands and find them. I know that ripple is likely to happen, and I can imagine my pelvis as one tin can, my head as the other tin can, and there's a constant communication between the two as I make that movement. So I'm really kind of looking for that. My head knows what my pelvis is doing, my pelvis knows what my head is doing, and you get that dialogue that goes up and down through the length of the spine as you're just making that very, very simple movement. And the more I do that, the more kind of clear and comfortable that articulation of my spine becomes. I hope that's sort of working for people. So we begin to find through that sort of exercise, we begin to find this sort of coordination of the head and the neck and the back. And it's kind of easy to look at that and sort of label it as good posture or label it as a straight back. But in the Alexander technique, we sort of see a problem with that, because it tends to be that if you shout sit up straight at somebody, they'll simply go stiff. And that is obviously not what we want going on. And also in the little girl here, there's two things. One is she's not stiff. And the other is that she's got that grass snake-like, animal-like, sinuous, elastic extension of her spine, organized by the poise of her head. But I bet you anything you like that she's not saying to herself, I must sit up straight. She's really just letting her structure work for herself without piling on the extra tension that with adults it's very difficult to avoid as soon as they start thinking, oh, I've got to have good posture, I've got to sit up straight. So this is why I'm more going at it from this angle of saying, can we just get more sense of articulation and awakeness through the spine? Okay, I'm going to move on to something else. In using our imagination with the tin can telephone, say, or saying, where is my head pointing? We're doing something that in the Alexander world is known as directing. And I thought we'd do, and how we direct ourselves using Alexander's idea of directing is really at the heart of the technique. So I thought we'd do some direction experiments just to clarify what I mean by that. I'm going to back up away from the camera so that you can see me. And the movement we're going to explore, I picked a really simple one. We're just going to do that. So you just want space around you enough to be able to open your arms out. Okay. And we're going to experiment doing that movement in character. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. So the first time you make that movement, actually just do it sort of as yourself. So so this is just your normal way of doing it. Okay. So you know what that feels like. The next one, and the characters I've got for this are quite extreme, and the point of them being quite extreme is that I want to make the contrasts. The first one is to say, okay, I'm going to make this same movement. It'll probably look almost exactly the same from the outside. But I want you to do that as the Incredible Hulk. So the characteristics are that you're enormously strong, you're enormously bulky, there's a lot of muscle mass there. There's also kind of a lot of inertia because you're so bulky. So just have a go in character as the Incredible Hulk. There we go. And then just while you're doing that, make a little mental note of what that feels like, what the sensation of it is, and then let your arms come back down by your sides and come out of character so you're no longer the Incredible Hulk. And the second one, there's three. The second one is as a scarecrow. So it's kind of brittle sticks, that sort of characterization. Try it with brittle sticks, so you're as a scarecrow. And again, see what the sensation is of that. And just file that away so we can compare notes on that in a minute. And then let your arms come back down by your sides, and we'll stop that again. And then the third character is as a big bird. So as a swan or a crane or a stork or an albatross or an eagle. Try it as a big bird. Spreading your wings. That's great. And again, make a note what the sensation of that is like, and then the experiment's over and we'll just compare notes on that. So I'm not quite sure how to do this. We can either do it in the chat, or let's try it like this. If I go to gallery view and say, wave at me with affirmative answers. Can you sense that there's a difference? Do they feel different? Okay, quite a lot, lots of nods. That's good. That's great. The next question is, if you can feel the difference, do you like one or other more than the others? Okay, yeah, okay, good. Interestingly, if you can feel that they're different, it's actually because they're setting up quite different patterns of muscular activity. So all movement and all postural activity and breathing and pretty much everything you do in playing the viol is based around muscular activity. And if we can change the patterns of muscular activity with our thinking, then we've got different options available to us. Let's go one step further. Who liked The Incredible Hulk? Okay, maybe nobody. Who?
You've got one, Tim. Somebody did say yes. Yeah, look, Michael and Edith.
Ibby, sorry, say that again. I had the.
I think you've got at least one saying yes for The Incredible Hulk.
Okay, good.
Michael and Edith.
No. That's good. I like a bit of variation. So we've got one Incredible Hulk. We've got one. Anybody like the Scarecrow? Okay. Who likes the bird? Okay. Who? I missed who the Incredible Hulk person. Who was it?
Michael and Edith Kimball.
Okay. Can I embarrass you, Michael and Edith, and ask you why you like the Incredible Hulk? What was the characteristic? You'll need to unmute yourself. Are you still muted?
There we go.
There you go. What's attractive about the Incredible Hulk version?
Well, it felt very alive. I felt I was breathing more, ready to take on the vial or something else.
Cool.
Although it was different from the bird. The bird is maybe more the thing, but the Hulk was.
Yeah. No. There's no right answers. This is something that we're coming to in a minute. So I kind of like it when there's some variety.
A freely flying Hulk would be ideal.
No, I think, but we'll get to what's good in a minute. Somebody who liked the bird. I don't mind who. There's usually more people who like the bird. So somebody who I'm going to remove. Their pin. Somebody who liked the bird, say something. About why you liked it.
Celia,
you're muted.
Yeah, better? You hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. There you are.
Okay, great. Well, obviously the bird is a positive thing, and it's got motion in it. So the whole thing goes together. Whereas the Hulk is just desperation.
Yeah. Harriet says she likes the feeling of strength, which I think is valid.
Okay.
Thank you, Celia. That's brilliant. I'm going to take your pin off again. There we go. So the point really is not to say that one is better than the other, but to say we have choice. And we don't always, I'm going to suggest, choose the way of directing ourselves that we like best. And we tend to be stuck in habit rather You could almost say that these different ways of directing ourselves are like different tone colours. And it's really useful actually to be able to make different colours as a musician. So you may have kind of one, you know, this is my sound, I kind of quite like it. But it's really interesting to be able to make different colours instead or as well. And I think that's the point with these directing experiments. And we don't always notice that we have choice, and we tend to get stuck in habit. And it's the Alexander technique is a process of really giving ourselves more choice so that we can choose what we want in the way of how we direct ourselves moment by moment, rather than saying, oh, well, this is just, you know, this is how I move, this is the bit that hurts when I move, and I don't feel like I can shift that. But by finding different ways of directing, we can actually shift back pain, neck pain, poor breathing. We've got about 12 minutes left, and I thought I'd move on to something, the sort of third section of this talk, and start talking in a little more detail about the upper limb, because as string players, we're very interested in bowing movement, in how we organize our left hand, how we can do shifts. So I thought we'd spend just a little bit of time on the remaining time just talking about the upper limb. Now, one of the main things that I notice is that if you ask somebody where their arm ends, they'll usually say here. So this is their arm, from their fingertips through their forearm, through their upper arm, and it stops at the top of the upper arm bone. But it's really, really useful and sort of more correct to include our shoulder bones, so our collarbones and our shoulder blades, in what you might call our wing structure. And I tend just to use a different word, because as soon as you say arm, it tends to be that people are just thinking of the bit up to the shoulder joint, but not further. So just to look at that on the skeleton, you've got the shoulder blade there, you've got the collarbone there. So one little exercise, and if there's two of you, you can actually, and you know there are some pairs there, you can actually just put hand flat on your friend's shoulder blade. It's about the same size as a shoulder blade, a hand. Whilst they do this, if you're on your own, you'll just have to do it without that extra feedback. So what I thought it would be useful to explore is just where your shoulder blade can go. So the range of movement of the shoulder blade, skimming freely about, hopefully, on the back of the ribs. So it'll kind of go forward, which brings it around the side of the ribs. It'll go back, which brings it towards the shoulder blade. It'll go up towards the ear. It'll go down below neutral. And the question is, where is neutral? And that's not such an easy question. it tends to be that a lot of people feel a lot of tension around their shoulders, and that tends to kind of jam where their shoulder girdle is able to go, and they end up with limited range of movement of exactly that movement that I was showing you, and it gets a kind of habitual position which is held by tension. So simply exploring that, saying, well, where does it go? And kind of waking up that movement is helpful to that. I'm going to suggest that the two instructions that we're given for shoulders, which are back, shoulders back, or shoulders down, are both fairly unhelpful. Shoulders back tends to squeeze the shoulder blades together. It's aimed at not rounding the shoulders forward. But if one is rounding the shoulders forward and then one pulls the shoulders back, I start looking narrow, don't I? And actually, you know, that's more my neutral. Shoulders down is also not so helpful because I want my torso big. So actually I need length between my hips and my shoulders. And I can push my shoulders down onto my ribs and towards my hips in a way that just limits my breathing and actually makes me shorter. So if I wanted a direction for my shoulders, I'm actually just going to say widthways. And eventually, when one becomes untangled enough, whatever stage that is, I don't know, one experiences that the shoulders kind of float there at their natural width rather than, you know, being placed, which is always going to stiffen them. We could also just look at the sternoclavicular joint, the inner end of the collarbone there, which is where that whole wing joins on. And if you, I know I sort of made the decision not to involve vials with this because I thought we just didn't have enough time. But if you imagine a whole length bowing movement from the tip of the bow to the heel, or the from the frog to the tip, then you're going to be involving, you can actually maybe just mime it, mime a long bow without a bow, and just maybe with a finger of your left hand on that sternoclavicular joint. Possibly, if we've got more time, or if this is part one. Then you'll feel some movement going on in the shoulder girdle as you make that long movement, but it does need to be connected to and supported by an organized and open head, neck, back interrelationship. So let's finish off with a couple of arm and snake skeleton movements. So this is a bit of a favorite picture of Leopold Stokowski, the conductor. And I think you get this feeling that his arms are really supported from his back, and that the energy that he manages to communicate as a conductor to the orchestra kind of comes from that connection of his arms into and out of his well-organized snake skeleton. So that's going to be the first one. So if you're there, and you can, it's as if your back opens to open your arms, and you can see if you can kind of get that sensation of your back being big and open just to support your arms. And we could look perhaps at the musculature of it just briefly. There we are. So on the right there, you've got the outer layers of muscle. So this is immediately under the skin. And everything north of the buttock, so everything above here that you can see is really arm muscle. So that outer layer of muscle around on the back really belongs to the arms. And on the left-hand side of the picture, I've drawn a sort of schematic of it because it's just too complicated to try and get all those muscles in your head all at once. So on the left-hand side, we've got this simpler version, which looks like a kind of fan shape. So the shoulder connects to the entire length of the spine through this kind of delta shape. And it's interesting to just try and come out of that. Maybe it's useful actually just to look at my back doing that. And you can keep your awareness in your back and see if you can sense, as you make this kind of movement, see if you can sense some or a bit more or all of that fan of muscle that we've just been looking at, and the way where the fingers go is connected to that big kind of double fan of muscle in the back. So you're using arm movement to kind of wake up that snake skeleton again. So we've got one more to do, which combines a couple of movements that we've done. So we had the sitting ripple of just moving forwards and back to neutral to sort of access that grass snake ripple of the spine, so that the spinal curves are allowed to kind of find that wave through them. And then we'll add on to that the arm fan. So I've got sort of two layers going on. I've got the deep postural muscles that look after the spinal curves, and I've got that outer layer of muscle that supports the arms. And if I take that into a forward and backward ripple, then I've actually got quite a bit to think about to keep track of that. If I can, if my awareness is such that I can really think into those different layers of muscle at the same time, then I can really get quite a lot going on there in terms of the ripple up through the spine and the double fan supporting the arms. And of course, you could have variations. You could say, well, the arms go up as I come forward, the arms go down as I come back, or I could do it the other way around. The arms go down as I come forward, they come up as I come back. And you have different dialogues going on between the spinal curves and the big arm muscles of the back. So I've been going just about an hour. I think I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that's given you some little things you can play with, which is really what it's about. So, Ibby, were there going to be some questions? Time for questions?
Yeah, I think it's question time. I mean, thank you so much, Tim. That's a really great introduction to the Alexander technique. So, yes, anyone has any questions for Tim? This is the moment. Anything, Lindsay?
Tim, great session.
Thank
Is
you.
there a textbook for the layman?
There's a couple of books by musicians. So one of them in particular that I think is relevant for viol players particularly, but it's a very good introductory book anyway, is called Just Play Naturally. And it's by a cellist called, she's also an Alexander teacher, but she's a cellist, called Vivian Mackey, which I think is Mackie.
Okay.
So I'd recommend that one. There's another one by a violinist called Betty Langford, called Mind and Muscle and Owner's Manual. And I think both of those are kind of coming at it from a musician's perspective, and I quite sort of like the flavour of those two books as well. So that would be a possibility.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you. Anyone else? Wow. Well, anyway,
I've got another question.
Oh, okay. All right. Right, Lindsay.
How long does it take for? I mean, how long's a piece of string? But how long does it take to assimilate that learning? I mean, I probably as long as you do it, but I mean, is it years or?
It's this. I think it's exactly the same as learning a musical instrument. So with a bit of practice and a bit of interest and maybe a good teacher, you start being able to do a bit very soon. And then you realize it's never ending, and it goes on for as long as you've got. So yes, I think it's exactly the same sort of size of learning as and the same sort of rewards as well. That there's rewards quickly, but there's also longer term gains as learning a musical instrument.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Tim. I think let's give Tim a round of applause for an excellent session. Thank you so much. I've got a couple of announcements. The how do we tune? How do we tune in a viol consort? What sort of temperaments should we be using? Can we tune by ear? Does it matter? So if you want a practical guide approach to tuning, Sarah Cunningham is our next speaker, and that's going to be next month on the 21st. Following that, in April, we won't have a lecture or a practical session, but we do have our AGM, which will be held online, and that's on the 20th. So do note these dates down. And then the most exciting thing is a live meeting in the music faculty at Oxford on the 23rd of April, Saturday the 23rd of April, and you're all warmly welcome to that. And the theme of that meeting is William Law. So if you're a Laws fan, that's a meeting not to be missed. That's the 23rd of April. But you'll get reminders and invitations for all these meetings in your inbox. And also in the next newsletter is the information about the live meeting especially. So I think that's probably it for this evening. I'm going to press the breakout rooms now. So if you don't want to stay, this is the time to leave. Here we go, create breakout rooms.
Round to, yeah, I'll have to get round to listening to the